Hello friends, Jeanette here with Vivo Vintage Designs. Today I am doing a very simple and very relaxing watercolor painting. This is perfect for the beginner. I only used 2 colors. So here I'm working on Arches watercolor paper. It's 100% cotton and I have taped off my sides. I'm using a large brush to wet down the entire surface of the paper. And while I let that water set into the paper, I'm going to mix my blue, and I'm going to mix one in a heavier consistency and one in a thinner consistency because I want that same color, but I want it light and I want it dark. So one has a little bit more water added and the other one has more pigment, less water. And I'm also going to mix this light pink. Now, of course, you don't have to use the exact colors that I'm using. I'm not even sure what the name of these colors are because I left my color chart downstairs, but I'm using my Muño pan paints. And I'm moving my coffee out of the way so I don't accidentally dip my brush into my coffee. Now, you can see I started with a large brush and I'm swiping a combination of the lighter and the darker color to create a sky. And I'm adding a little bit of the pink here and there. Not too much though. I just want a little hint of the pink. And now I am creating my horizon. And notice that my horizon is about 2/3 of the way down on my paper. Now the entire paper is wet, so it's going to bleed. And that's okay because I want that fuzzy background look as though it's in the distance. And here I'm lifting a little bit of that, or rather blending a little bit of that pink. I don't want it to be so harsh. I want it to be very soft. And I'm adding a little bit more of the deeper blue in certain areas. And now for my water, I'm just taking the deeper blue and just swiping across the paper, but I'm not making it I'm trying to create the lines pretty straight because I want it to look like it's very calm water. And now I've let my paper dry a little bit, so I'm mixing a little bit more paint, and because the paper is dry, a little bit drier now, as I add this color to the paper, it won't bleed out as much because I gave it time to dry. And I'm using a heavier consistency of paint, meaning more paint, less water. And I am just creating like distant trees. And you can see, really simple. I'm just making marks on the paper. And now I'm defining where the land ends and the water begins. But I want a reflection on the water. So I'm just using whatever paint is left on my brush to bring the reflection down into the water. And I'm making sure that it's not too much. I want to keep it soft, but I want a more definite line between the water and the land. So I'm just adding a little bit more pigment. And in the foreground, I'm going to create these weeds. It's just something out of my imagination. So the paper is still damp. And it's more damp on the right side than it is on the left side because you can see as I'm adding that darker blue, it's kind of blending on the right hand side, but on the left hand side you'll see here it's really not blending too much because that side of the paper has dried. But that's okay, I can fix that because these will be the weeds in the distance. They'll be further back. And then we're going to create some in the foreground, which will be brighter or deeper blue, and they'll be more sharp. So again, you can see that on the left hand side there, it's not really blending into the paper because it's dried. So I've cleaned my brush, dabbed it on my paper towel, and I'm just using a little bit of the water on the brush to soften the edges a little bit so that they're not so harsh and it looks like it's more in the background instead of sharp lines. And now I'm using that heavier consistency paint and I'm just dotting a little bit more on the ones on the right, just to make them stand out a little bit more, but not too much. This is a really simple painting that anyone can do. You don't have to have a lot of experience with watercolor. This is just very simple, very relaxing. So take your time with it, have fun with it, and don't try to be perfect about it. Now I'm using my new Rosemary & Co. brush. This is an extended tip brush, and I absolutely love this brush. It creates these beautiful thin lines, and I'm using it to create the stems of these grasses or weeds. And now I'm using the same color, and it's kind of watery. It's got more water than paint, and I'm using it to create some tall grasses. And the paper is still a little bit damp, so these will soften. Now, if you don't have this brush, of course, you can use any brush you have with a fine tip, or even a liner brush, or they're also called script brushes, a rigger brush. Just to flick your wrist and make these long grasses, make some longer and shorter. Now I'm just mixing a little bit more paint, and I'm going to try and create some darker ones. You can see that the paint is a little bit thicker, less water. I'm going in all different directions. Now I'm just mixing more paint as my paper dries a little bit more. And this one is very heavy, more pigment, less water, because now I want to create the weeds or the grasses in the foreground. I want these to appear as though they're closer, so I don't want them to blend into the paper. So I gave the paper a little time to dry, and you can see that using a heavy consistency of paint brings them to the foreground. And I'm just going to create some taller ones, shorter ones. I'm going to go over the ones that I painted in the background. Some will be curved, others will be straight up and down. And all I'm doing is using the tip of the brush to create these dots. Now these Muñoz pan paints that I mentioned in the beginning of the video is a perfect set for the beginner. It's got 48 pans, and they're about, I'm not sure if it's $30 or $40, and I've had these paints for a few years now, and I'm nowhere near the bottom of each pan. I use them all the time. They're student grade, but the pigment, they're very pigmented. I love working with these. So I do recommend them if you're thinking about trying watercolor for the first time. Also, some of the brushes that I'm using are by Rosemary & Co. and they're by Anna Mason, Rosemary & Co. And I think it was a set of 4 or 5 brushes, and they have very short bristles, so it gives you more control when you're painting, and as a beginner that's something that you really need. So now I'm using the extended tip brush to create the stems for the new grasses that I added in the foreground. I find this painting very soothing, all the blues, just using 2 colors, keeping it very, very simple, and I only added a touch of the pink. So you can see that by adding more water to your paint, you can make it lighter or darker. And even though it's just one color, you can create a lot of depth in your painting. And now I'm just filling in with the grasses. And that's about it. That's all I did. And when I peel the tape off, you'll see just how pretty and simple this painting is. I do hope that you give it a try. And you can check the description box for links to the products used. And if you have any questions about anything you've seen me do here, please leave it in the comments. I'll always get back to you. And if you do give this painting a try, I would love for you to share it with me. You can do that on our Facebook group, Vibo Vintage Design Tutorials. I created that group so that my subscribers would have a place to share their versions of the paintings and techniques learned on this channel. Now you can just fill in wherever you think you may need some more grasses, make some really long, make some shorter. And now I'm just going to add a few in the very center. I'm keeping them short because I want the water to be visible. You can even drag it from the top. And that's it. So let's peel the tape off, which is one of the best parts. And look how pretty that is. It only took a few minutes, 2 colors, and a lot of fun. Thanks for watching.